In the days when the transfer ship from Pearl Harbor was drawn inland toward Texas, the dryness of the air felt like another language altogether. Muranaka Sumiko sat upright in the bed of the truck. She did not know what the place ahead of her looked like. She only knew that indoor water had always felt as distant as a rumor. She had been born in a small coastal village near Hiroshima, where there was a shallow well behind the house, and the water level rose and fell with the seasons and the tides. The water for washing dishes, washing vegetables, washing the body, all had to be carried up, bucket by human hands. She had bathed in the sea more times than she had ever bathed indoors. Waves slapped against her shins, and afterward she would rinse herself once with well water. That was the entirety of what she understood clean to mean. From a distance, the family houses in Texas looked enormous. Their whitewashed exterior walls were piercingly bright in the sunlight, and the windows threw layer upon layer of reflection. She was assigned as a laborer to one of these households, responsible for cleaning, laundry, and keeping things in order. She had imagined it would be similar to the barracks, simple, frugal, or else like the rough field kitchens the Japanese army had put up on outlying islands. But when the mistress of the house opened the door and let her step inside, she saw for the first time water flowing from a metal mouth in the wall, flowing without effort, without rope, without buckets, without anyone having to walk down a stone stairway to the well. Her gaze settled on the silver pipe beneath the sink. It looked like some kind of underground channel, emerging from the floor and rising up into the metal fixture from which water poured out in a steady, quiet stream. That continuous, effortless flow made her want to approach, but she only stood there, stiff, as though facing something she was not supposed to touch. The cold gleam of the faucet flashed briefly across the back of her hand, then wavered slightly as the wind stirred the light outside the window. Not long afterward, she was led to the laundry room. It was a place cleaner than any well house she had ever seen. There was no dampness on the floorboards, no slanted washboard propped over a basin. Instead, she saw a large metal drum occupying the center of the room, its bulk almost filling the narrow space. A round hatch was set into its side, like the door to some sort of ship's compartment. Pipes snaked out from beneath the drum and into a drain in the wall. The air carried a faint sweetness, an unfamiliar powdery scent that had nothing to do with seawater or firewood. It floated up from the cardboard box of laundry detergent at the side, whose surface showed a large printed design in colors bright enough to resemble candy wrappers. She stood in front of the washing machine, almost holding her breath. The mistress of the house placed a basket of dirty laundry into the drum, sprinkled a measure of powder on top, and then pressed a switch. The metal drum began to vibrate. At first there was a soft hum, and then water rushed in along the inner wall, striking the fabric with an even, repetitive sound. At that moment, Sumiko's eyes stopped moving. The rhythm sounded uncannily like something she had heard before, like a ship's hull being squeezed by waves, or like someone gently stirring water in a wooden tub. She took one step forward. The soles of her shoes made a faint sound on the floor. She leaned in to look. The hatch was shut tight, and the water inside spun around, carrying small, thin traces of foam. She had never seen a structure like this. Wooden tubs did not stir themselves. Well water did not flow in by its own will. Seawater could not gather, warm and contained, in a single vessel. All the knowledge she carried from the countryside suddenly seemed to have no place in front of this machine, and yet the machine's presence here in this household felt perfectly natural, as if every home ought to possess one. She did not understand the full purpose of the device, but in her life, bathing had always been most closely linked to the combination of water plus container. One could bathe in a wooden basin, in a wooden tub. Even a shallow trench dug in the sand at the seashore could, roughly speaking, serve the same function. Staring at the metal drum that filled itself automatically with water, she felt all these earlier experiences connect into a single pattern, like lines rapidly forming a diagram. She had almost no doubt about what she was looking at. She sensed that the water temperature was similar to what one would use for hand-washing clothing. The steam rising from the gap was thin, soft, neither scalding nor cold. She lifted her hand as if to touch, then let it fall again. Growing up by the well had left her with a habit. Whenever she saw water, she wanted to confirm whether it could be used. Her body moved according to that habit now. She set her fingertip lightly against the edge of the hatch. It was the first time she had tried to approach this machine. The air in the laundry room felt light because of the detergent's sweetness. Sunlight fell through the window panes onto the drum and broke into scattered reflections. Sumiko stood there, her expression neither curious nor fearful, but calm, as if she had finally found an equivalent to something she already knew. It was as though she were waiting for an appropriate moment, an opportunity to confirm whether this water could be used to wash the body just as she would have at home. She had no idea that this misidentification would slowly take on a more concrete form in the days ahead, or that she was already moving closer to danger. To her, for now, this was nothing more than a big city bathtub, and she was merely someone from the countryside who had come to the city for the first time. The laundry room was small. Daylight on the metal surface produced a faint halo. In the intervals between daily tasks, Muranaka Sumiko began quietly detouring toward the washing machine. She was not exactly watching it. She was repeating the countryside attitude toward any unfamiliar implement. Draw near, confirm, test. She did not understand the machine's full function, but from its shape and sound she could extract familiar elements. This was not curiosity so much as a simple process of comparison. It was less an act of thinking than a natural extension of habit. The first minor injury happened quickly. One day, the washing machine was running. Water along the sidewall was striking the contents with its usual steady rhythm. She wanted to know how deep the water was and slid a finger in through the gap at the edge of the lid. What she touched was not water, but the edge of the rotating drum. It was a metal surface, slightly roughened by years of use. As it turned, it brushed lightly across the back of her hand, leaving a narrow red mark. The pain was not severe, but her skin grew hot at once, as if sunburned. She pulled her hand back. She did not gasp or recoil. She merely glanced at the speed of the drum, as she might have done when a wooden tub was being stirred too hard and someone's hand grazed the ladle. The second minor injury was an almost incidental mishap. She saw the mistress pour in detergent, the powder floating in a white haze across the surface of the water. When she stepped closer, the open edge of the cardboard box revealed a small strip of exposed metal. She reached to steady herself by holding the box, and the sharp edge sliced her fingertip. She instantly pressed the wound with her other hand. A tiny bead of blood rose to the skin, and the prickling pain made her pause for a second. Then she set the box back in its place, square and upright, as if handling a fallen wooden bucket lid. There was no resentment, no suspicion. If anything, that small cut strengthened her belief in the cleaning power of the powder, because in her experience, objects capable of causing minor cuts were often associated with something hard, effective, or strong. The third minor injury occurred when she tried to understand the washing machine's inner workings from another angle. She squatted down to inspect the drain. Water fell from the drum in a thin, continuous sound, like a leak at a well at night. Leaning too far forward, she braced her elbow against the smooth floor. Her weight shifted just a little, and her knee slipped, striking the edge of a floor tile near the drain. It was not a heavy blow, but enough to leave a dark bruise. She pressed a hand against the spot through the fabric, feeling a muted throb beneath her work pants. She did not step back. She simply moved to a slightly different position and continued observing, as if this small pain were no different from slipping on the stones by the well while drawing water. These minor injuries accumulated into a delicate kind of knowledge. She was not learning the machine's dangers in the abstract. She was using her body in place of language to feel out its boundaries. In her life, no one had ever warned her about the weight of a wooden tub, or told her that rocks at the shore become slick in strong winds. Those were things one discovered a little at a time, through contact. To her, the washing machine was not a modern device in the conceptual sense. It was a new kind of tub, one whose handling needed to be learned through repeated physical encounter. Gradually, she came to recognize the machine's rhythm. She could distinguish between the sound of water entering and water draining, and from the degree of vibration, she could tell when it was about to switch into a spin cycle. She treated these as observations, like watching the weather, no technical analysis, no conscious purpose, simply adapting by drawing on her experience of daily life. She would sometimes press the outside of the drum with her palm to test whether it was hot, in the same way she might lay a hand on a recently heated wooden bathtub. The gesture was identical, only this time it was a metal shell beneath her fingers. The small injuries did not drive her away. On the contrary, they strengthened a psychological certainty. This was a very powerful bathtub. A vessel that could make clothes this clean and that could constantly adjust water temperature and flow almost had to be meant for making the human body cleaner than seawater, well water, or wooden tubs ever could. It was a simple logic, so simple as to be almost unarguable. If city homes were so clean, then they must have washing and bathing equipment superior to anything in the countryside. For her, the drum naturally became part of that category. Her actions began to take on something like a ritual quality. Every day after work, she would pause in front of the washing machine. She would look at it when it was idle, at the way the interior metal dried and dulled, at the shadow cast by the detergent box across the lid. It was not inspection and not anxiety. It was a slow approach to something unfamiliar. It was precisely this habitual approach that, on a later day, led her to the very edge of danger. She did not realize that this path of experience would suddenly bend in the heat of summer, nor that the inner space of the metal drum was utterly different from any wooden tub she had known. Those early scrapes and bruises were only the prelude. A new age of machinery was offering her a very slight warning. If she continued, the object in front of her would no longer remain harmless. Summer in Texas arrived quickly. Heat shimmered off the ground, the air dry as paper. Clothes wet with sweat could be hung and dried in minutes. Sumiko spent more time working outdoors. Fibers clung to her forearms, and sweat and dust formed a thin layer along her neck and back. This discomfort was not unfamiliar. She had labored in fields at home, where humidity and mud made the body just as sticky. But here, the air was so dry that sweat evaporated too fast, leaving only a powdery crust of salt on her skin. Her movements grew heavier, her legs stiffened, places where the fabric clung to her skin itched, as if fine grit had lodged in the weave. When she stepped back into the cooler laundry room, the air there was only slightly less hot, yet the difference still felt tangible. The washing machine sat in the middle of the room, slightly warm where the sunlight had touched it. Its metal casing gave off a faint smell, a blend of detergent's sweetness, damp cloth, and the dry dust of Texas soil drifting through the air. Sumiko's gaze settled on the narrow gap at the edge of the hatch. There was a movement inside, the sound of water filling. Today that sound was clearer than usual, like water running along wooden planks and then breaking apart. She stopped in the shadow of the open doorway, her chest rising and falling slowly with each breath. Sweat on her body had congealed into a tacky film in the still air, and the sound of water in the drum gripped her attention completely. Her experience told her that only when water had just been poured into a tub or trough did it sound this new. She took 2 steps forward, the soles of her shoes thudding softly against the floor. The lid of the washing machine was not fully closed. Inside, freshly drawn water shone with a clear surface. Bubbles, small and sparse, formed and broke. It was as though the water were breathing. She set her hands on the rim of the drum, her fingers pressing firmly into the metal, and leaned in a little. The water gave off a thin mist, mingled with the scent of detergent. The air carried a temperature utterly unlike anything that existed in her previous life. She moved her face closer, as if testing whether the smell might make her feel cleaner. The water was warm. It was not the cold of well water, nor the faint heat of seawater warmed by the sun, but an even, measured warmth, as if produced by precise calculation inside the machine. She let her fingertips dip into the surface. The water slid over her knuckles and washed away the dust of the morning in an instant. At that moment, her body was called by something entirely familiar. In the countryside, whenever she saw water like this, she knew it was suitable for washing the body. She did not move at once. She stood as she would have at a wooden tub, first steadying herself by gripping the rim with both hands and confirming she could keep her balance. Her toes shifted slightly on the floor, seeking a spot that would not slip. The machine was still humming faintly, the surface of the water tilting gently to one side with the residual movement. A barely audible vibration crept through the metal. She lowered her head again, looking at the soft, warm layer of water. Her gaze was calm, even faintly certain, as if everything were as it ought to be. Then she lifted one foot and set it on the rim. Her movements were slow and without haste, just as natural as, in childhood, placing a foot into a shallow trench filled with seawater. The metal was warm at first touch, then slightly hot, but she adjusted and held steady. She raised her other foot onto the rim as well, crouching, her weight now centered over the opening of the drum. The inner wall of the machine caught the light, the water inside reflecting a small bright patch upward. There was a barely perceptible hum. She eased one leg down into the water. The warmth rose up along her skin like a thin cloth laid gently over her. She did not feel nervous. Her motion had a kind of surrender to the environment in it. In her mind, the logic was simple. The water was clear. The temperature ideal. The drum's walls closed her in very effectively. Entering into it was the most natural action. She bent at the waist, placing both hands firmly on the rim and sliding her body slowly into the drum. The cylinder was shallower than she had imagined. She had thought the water might reach her waist, but it barely came up to her calves. She tried adjusting her posture, tucking her knees closer to sink deeper. The curve of the drum forced her into a tight crouch. As her back pressed against the inner wall, she felt a flash of cold. The water shifted slightly with her movement. In the next second, she realized something was wrong. It was not the temperature or the water itself. It was the space. Wooden tubs or seawater never locked the body in place. But here, the space was too narrow, the curvature of the drum leaving her almost no room. She tried to stretch her legs and found her knees lodged against the inner curve. She tried to adjust her position, pushing up with her hands, but the rim of the drum was too high. Her arms could not generate enough leverage. The machine shuddered briefly as some residual part of the cycle completed. The vibration was almost imperceptible, but in that confined space, it was enough to throw her momentarily off balance. Her back pressed tighter against the metal, her knees were driven forward into a more acute angle. The inner wall of the drum, which had earlier seemed smooth, now formed a fixed barrier beneath her joints. Her breathing quickened. The metal amplified the sound within. Each rise of her chest seemed to bounce off the walls and return to her ears. The water rippled narrowly at the base of the drum, its slight movement echoing in the curved interior. She tried to push herself upright, but her shoulders struck the side. She tried to straighten her legs, but the angle of the drum pinned her knees in place. Reaching for the rim, she discovered her hands were too low, too far from the edge to pull her weight up. She did not know how the machine worked, but for the first time she understood. This was something beyond her control. The wooden tubs at home never held a person like this. The sea never confined her. The edges of her vision seemed to tremble with each breath. Water clung to the bottom of the drum, just enough to move, not enough to carry. The coldness of the metal and the warmth of the water met on her skin in dissonance, heightening a sense of pressure. It felt as if the whole room were tilting toward her. She had no idea how long she remained stuck inside. She only heard the occasional leftover vibration of the machine, a faint, incomplete tremor along the wall. Not enough to make the drum spin, but enough to make her feel her body sway slightly in the cramped space. Those small, unpredictable movements were more unsettling than a visible, immediate danger. She could not tell if, in the next second, the system would suddenly start up again and drag her into some mechanism she did not understand. She tried to remain still, but even the smallest shift made the metal scrape lightly against her back. Gradually, she realized that she had no way of freeing herself by force. She could only wait to be discovered. Her breaths grew shallow and short. The rise and fall of her chest sent tiny waves across the water, which in turn reflected fragments of light onto the metal. Footsteps sounded outside the laundry room. She could not lift her head, could not judge the distance. The door opened. She saw light flood through the narrow gap at the edge of the lid. It cut across the darkness of the drum like a thin blade, spilling over the water. Her body was still jammed fast, but the arrival of light made the air feel marginally less tight. Someone had come. When the light entered the drum, Muranaka Sumiko did not look up. She was not physically able to. She saw only that the brightness broke into a narrow line, falling onto the surface of the water. She heard the footsteps stop. Then came a short intake of breath, so constrained that under ordinary circumstances it would have been inaudible. In the hollow space of the drum, it was starkly clear. The mistress did not scold her. She stepped closer and placed her hands firmly on the rim. The first thing she did was reach over and switch off the power. When the electricity was cut, the faint hum inside the metal vanished. like a floor that had been trembling, subsiding into stillness. Sumiko's breathing was still rapid. Her shoulders brushed the walls with each breath, and the water's surface vibrated faintly with her trembling. The mistress bent down and reached in through the opening. Her fingers first touched the inside edge of the drum, then found Sumiko's shoulder. The touch was not a grab, but a confirmation, checking whether she was injured, whether she could still move, whether she was conscious of her surroundings. Her movements were very light, marked by a careful deliberation, as if handling something that might break, and at the same time by the basic reflex to protect another person. She tried to support Sumiko's upper arm so that her shoulder would no longer be pressed directly against the curve of the drum. With her other hand, she steadied the elbow. Sumiko's body was rigid from being jammed in place. She did not resist or struggle. She simply let the guidance take hold. The mistress quickly understood that she could not haul her straight out. She needed first to release the trapped knee. She asked Sumiko, in simple words and gestures, to try shifting her leg slightly. The inner wall of the drum was slick with a thin layer of water and summer heat. After several attempts, with the external support and the limited space, she finally managed to slide her knee out from the curve that had locked it. Once the joint was free, her posture loosened a little. The mistress then fastened her hand around Sumiko's upper arm. Her grip was firm but not rough. She helped her body rise inch by inch until her shoulders neared the rim. She did not yank her up at once. Instead, she told her to place both hands on the edge of the drum to re-establish her own balance. Sumiko's wet fingertips pressed onto the metal. Her knuckles were rigid with tension, but in the moment when she could again touch the rim, her breathing visibly slowed. The mistress began to pull her out of the drum. Her method was not that of a rescuer acting in panic, but of a person used to calmly handling unexpected domestic situations. Steady, slow, orderly. As Sumiko emerged, water ran off her legs and down the drum's outer wall, pooling on the floor. She stood unsteadily. Her feet were uncertain, like someone coming ashore after being in the sea. Her knees retained the tightness of having been forced into a crouch, and her back trembled faintly from the prolonged pressure against the curve. The mistress kept a hand on her shoulder. She did not tell her to stand straight immediately. She waited for her to adjust to the brightness and air outside the machine. Then she took a towel from the rack, a coarse cloth usually used to wipe the machine's exterior, and draped it lightly over Sumiko's shoulders. The towel absorbed the water beading on her skin, and in this moment of temperature confusion, it kept her from chilling too fast. No feelings were expressed in words, but the care in the mistress's actions was more direct than any language. She examined Sumiko's posture and expression with a quiet, professional eye, checking whether she could stand unsupported, whether there were new scrapes on her hands. Her fingers briefly pressed against Sumiko's wrist, as if instinctively checking her pulse. Then she bent over to inspect the inside of the washing machine. She was not looking for fault in Sumiko. She was determining whether the drum had been bent by the weight, whether the drain was blocked, whether any electrical components had been damaged or gotten wet, whether there was a risk for future use. Her inspection carried no emotional tone. It expressed a sense of order. In this household, the washing machine was an apparatus requiring proper maintenance, and any accident had to be understood and prevented from recurring. Sumiko stood to one side, the towel around her shoulders still shaking slightly. She did not know where to put her hands or what posture to assume. She did not know whether she should kneel, withdraw, or make any gesture of apology. She only knew that she had been pulled out of a narrow metal space, and that the person who had pulled her out had not raised her voice, had only used a quiet kindness to hold her upright. When the mistress was sure there was no immediate danger with the machine, she led Sumiko out of the laundry room. The light in the hallway was brighter, the air clearer. She guided her into the bathroom, a tiled, enclosed room with a flush toilet, bathtub and shower. Sumiko paused in the doorway, as tense as if entering a city for the first time. She did not understand what each fixture was for. The mistress did not rush her. She simply turned on the shower. Warm water fell along the tiles. There was no explanation beyond the actions themselves. The sequence was simple and precise. Open the water, place the towel, exchange the coarse cloth for a softer bath towel, set Sumiko's hand under the stream. It was not a lesson and not a reprimand. It was a silent demonstration, allowing her to grasp the functions of these fixtures through her body, just as she had once learned wells, tubs, and the sea. That same day, the incident was reported to the camp administration. Staff came to the house and recorded the details with the mistress: the state of the washing machine, the nature of the entrapment, the presence or absence of injury. They checked the drum, determined whether repairs were necessary, and wrote the event into the file of her labor assignment. No one scolded her. No one interrogated her. The entire procedure was cool and concise: accident, record, measures, prevention. In the days that followed, the rules regarding the use of the bathroom were revised. Female POW laborers were given clearer bathing periods, with additional time during extreme weather. New notices were posted in the laundry room. POWs were forbidden from entering the drum, from standing near the rim when the machine was in operation, from crouching near the drain while it ran. The rules were written on actual cards and put up on the walls, but they carried no punitive tone. The most visible change appeared in the mistress herself. At some point each day, she took the time to quietly check whether Sumiko was handling the bathing routine with ease, whether she knew how to adjust the temperature, whether she remembered where the towels were kept, whether she could position herself safely on the tiles. She did not ask questions or give detailed instructions, but in small ways she always helped a little more than strictly necessary. Straightening a crooked towel, moving a stool closer so it would not slip, arranging objects so that Sumiko would not have to reach far. During that period, Sumiko learned numerous technical details: how to pull the curtain, how to judge if the water was too hot, how to close the faucet fully so it would not leak, how to stand steadily on the slick tiles. She absorbed this information quietly, applying all her concentration. She learned this new system of living not by discussion, but by repetition. Yet the true change did not lie in these skills. What altered her was the experience of being pulled out of the drum. It was the first time she had seen a mistake corrected not with shouting or threats, but with procedures, with care, with a kind of calm, gentle guidance extended to a stranger. After that, on an evening when she turned off the tap in the bathroom, she happened to see the faint bruise still lingering on her wrist. In the reflected light off the tiles, the mark no longer looked so dark, but it clearly traced the place where she had been caught. It quietly marked the threshold where she had crossed from one world into another. She did not know how the incident in the washing machine would be written in the official record, nor whether anyone would ever mention it. She only knew that since that day, this family's attitude toward her had shifted ever so slightly. She was no longer merely a POW laborer in the strict sense, nor a coldly regarded outsider. She had become someone who needed to be instructed, protected, led safely into a new structure of daily life. In the midsummer heat of Texas, she stood for the first time fully on the rails of that family's existence. Those rails were made of metal, tiles, clear water, and towels. Strange to her at first, yet more stable than anything she had once known. The procedures for repatriation began in autumn. The air in Texas turned dry and cool. The wind moving over the pasture carried a sharper clarity. Muranaka Sumiko continued her work by habit. The washing machine's vibration never changed. Each hum was exactly as steady as when she had first arrived. She no longer went too close. She knew the force of the drum, and she knew how the metal edges waited in the light. This knowledge had not been explained to her. It had been written into her skin and bones over those months. Faint marks still lingered. A pale trace on her wrist where she had been trapped. A bruise on her knee that had faded to a light tea color. They no longer hurt. But when she moved, they sometimes reminded her, in a small physical way, of the posture in which she had been caught. Cramped, compressed, a stillness that carried a hint of suffocation. The experience had not become fear. It was a mark, a reminder that the boundary between her and this new world had once been drawn here. Using the bathroom had become simple. She opened the faucet with ease, her hand steady as she tested the temperature. She knew where towels were kept, where the soap sat, where the drain led. She always stood where the tiles were least slippery, her movements slow, but no longer stiff. Her adaptation had not come through learning words. It had come through one accident, one correction, a new set of rules, and certain subtle gestures from the mistress. On the eve of her departure, she stood alone at the laundry room door. The machine was silent. The lid stood open, the interior dry and still. Sunlight slid through the window and laid a shallow patch of brightness across the inner drum. The light had no warmth, yet it softened the look of the metal. She walked closer and looked at the inner wall that had once trapped her. Now it was just an empty container, waiting to be filled with cloth and water. It seemed as if it had never harmed anyone. She did not touch it. She only stood and watched. The interior no longer appeared incomprehensible, yet it had not become intimate. It was a machine performing its function in this household and this era. Her misidentification and her panic had been a small episode embedded in its operational life, recorded by the system, absorbed by daily routine, and then quietly carried away by time. The next day, repatriation orders arrived. The mistress gathered the items to be returned to the camp. Sumiko's personal file was placed in an envelope, including notes on her work, her adjustment, and the incident with the washing machine. All of it was written in neutral language, without evaluation or emotion, like another form of proof that her life had passed through this place. As Sumiko prepared to leave, she passed the bathroom doorway. The faucet gleamed under the morning light, the metal pipe running quietly inside the wall. She reached out and lightly touched the tap. The coolness of the metal met her fingertips, an unremarkable contact that nonetheless reminded her how alien and distant this water had once seemed on the first day. She stood there for a few seconds, then let go and walked on. At the assembly point, the wind lifted the hem of her clothing and carried the scent of dry grass. The truck waiting in front of the barracks was not so different from the one that had brought her to Texas. She looked up at the clear sky. The light reflected in her eyes like the arc of sun she had once seen inside the washing machine's drum. She did not turn back toward the house, nor did she scan the familiar objects. She simply followed the line of prisoners, stepping onto the truck one step at a time. Her stride was light and steady. Her back was no longer rigid. Her body had learned the temperature of this water, this air, this system's rhythm. In time, those habits would fade. What remained would be the traces of what had happened. As the truck pulled away, wind from the open canvas fluttered her sleeve. She glanced down at the back of her hand. The faint line where the drum had scraped her had almost disappeared. Her eyes paused there for a moment, then lifted to the road ahead. Dust rose beneath the wheels and spread through the sunlight, like a line of water being stirred anew. She understood that she had already stepped out of one world and had not yet fully entered another. Her body had once gone inside a machine and been brought out again. On that day, she had been like a soaked garment hung back in open air. It was not the climax of her story, nor the most important moment of her life. But it was, in truth, the first time she had personally felt what after the war might mean.